Thank you, Ken. Thank you. Third trivia question. What does PhD stand for? Let's not get into that right now. We're going to hear a lot about that later, right? Well, again, let me, on behalf of the college, welcome everybody here this evening, and certainly to extend our appreciation again to Fidelity Investments, and particularly the technology group of Fidelity Investments, who have sponsored this Leadership in Technology Executive Speakers Series. To the entire Fidelity Investments team here tonight, I want you to stand up, please. Would you please a second? Okay. And we want to thank you very, very much for your tremendous support here. Needless to say, this series would not have been possible without it, and we hope that you had a chance to look back there and see how far this has come, right? So over the 6 years of the series, it's grown in popularity and demand. And of course, EB2 has been filled to standing room only, but tonight we have the Hunt Auditorium filled to standing room only. So thank you all for being here and for being part of the history that this event tonight represents. Thank you. Now, we're honored tonight to have as our special guest speaker, Dr. Jorge Cham, the creator of Pile Higher and Deeper, which is another way of talking about PhD, right? The comic strip about life, or the lack thereof, in academia. Often called the Dilbert of academia, PhD has appeared in Stanford, MIT, Caltech, and Carnegie Mellon newspapers, among others, and is published online, where it receives over 8 million visitors a year from over 1,000 universities and colleges worldwide. Jorge was born and raised in the Republic of Panama. He received his BS degree from Georgia Tech and his MS and PhD degrees from Stanford University, specializing in robotics. He was subsequently an instructor and research associate at Caltech from 2003 to 2005, where his work focused on developing smart neural implants. Jorge is also the founding board member of Endeavor College Prep, a nonprofit school for kids in East LA, and co-founder of PhD TV, a video science and discovery outreach collaborative that aims to close the gap between researchers and the public. Jorge travels and presents all over the world to thousands of graduate students, faculty, and administrators on the graduate student experience. And to date, 5 PhD book collections have been published. Jorge lives near Los Angeles with his family. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming and offering a bienvenido to our speaker, Jorge Cham. Jorge, thank you, sir.
Hey. How's it going? Oh, come on. Didn't sound so good. How's it going? Great. Not much better. But I'll take what I can get. Actually, I'm just here to introduce the next person, which is... first let me thank Ken and the dean and the department and the library for inviting me here today and organizing this great event for you guys. Let's give them a quick round of applause, yeah? And Fidelity, who's here, I guess, sponsoring the talk. I'm sure retirement is the first thing on everyone's mind here. Raise your hand if you know what a 401k is, actually. 3 of you, okay, good. I'm glad you were thinking ahead. But mostly let me thank you guys for coming to this event. I know it's 6 p.m., right, on a Tuesday afternoon. I'm sure most of you at this hour would much rather be in the lab, in your offices, working hard, starting your day. But instead, you're here procrastinating with us, so thank you, thanks.
We saw we got free food here.
There's what? There's free food? Excuse me, I'm gonna. But no, yeah, let me see. How many of you here are graduate students? Raise your hand, raise your, holy cow. How many of you here are undergrads? Undergrads? How many? All right, a couple. Cool. Ooh. Run! Let me see. How many of you here are professors? Do we have any professors in the room? How many of you are faculty? All right. A pretty good number. Thank you for raising your hand. That's very brave of you. Security, can we now get him out of here? And let's see, I would also ask about postdocs. But I think they're used to being ignored. So why bother? So today I'm just going to talk about my experiences getting my PhD, my sort of experience with grad school. And as the dean said, I was a grad student at Stanford University, and I was there for about several years. And in fact, my thesis there, my research, focused on making these small robots that could run like cockroaches. Yeah. So here's a quick movie of what these robots look like. Yeah. So the reason I like to show this movie is there's actually two reasons I like to show this movie. First of all, I feel like this movie really kind of represents what grad school felt like. You guys probably know the feeling, right? You feel like you're running all the time, but you're not getting anywhere. Meanwhile, there's a more intelligent being stamping you down. The whole time. But I also like to show this movie because it's really the only way that anyone will look at my research anymore. Because it's become very clear to me that by far much more popular than the research I spent years working on as part of my career. By far more popular, apparently, has been what I was working on when I should have been doing research, when I was procrastinating, which was to make these comic strips called Piled Higher and Deeper, or PhD comics. And so how it all started for me was that it was my first term in grad school, and I saw this advertisement in the newspaper calling for comics from students. And I remember thinking at the time that, there are a lot of stories about being a grad student, about being an academic, that you really don't hear anywhere else, right? In popular culture and movies and TV shows, it's always about the police, right? And detectives. It's always about all the dramas are always about lawyers and doctors, right? I mean, the real doctors. Not the ones of philosophy. Right? But you never see anything about grad students, right? And so I asked myself the question, back then, who is this strange creature? Called the graduate student. What's going on inside of their complex and complicated brain? And it turned out apparently apparently it's not that complicated. I mean that in the sense that, most of the grad students that I knew weren't these kind of crazy, eccentric, obsessive types of stereotypes and caricatures of weird, awkward people that you see portrayed in popular culture, whenever they try to feature a scientist or a researcher or just someone who happens to be smart. Big Bang Theory. Most of the people that I knew in grad school were really just kind of, regular people. We were mostly just trying to survive the experience. And so that's what the comics became about. They became about surviving those one-on-one meetings with your professor. You feel about this big sitting in front of him. surviving the begging that you have to do. Please, can I do free work for you? Actually, the floor needs a good mopping. Let's see, surviving being a teaching assistant. You know, and having to deal with those annoying undergrads. No offense to the 5 of you here today. But yeah, surviving those late night project sessions. Learning about grad student etiquette. What you should and should never ask a grad student. How's your research? Let's see what else. And qualifying exams or oral exams. Good times, good times. But then, you know, eventually other characters started to appear in the comics, including, for example, Cecilia, one of the, you know, brave 5 to 10% of women in computer science or electrical engineering or physics or some fields like that, who, like many of us, I think, often had a hard time admitting that they are kind of a little bit of geeks, a little bit of a geek. Then we also had the token humanities grad student, Tejal, who's always protesting something. And then, of course, we also had that guy, right? That guy that everybody seems to have in their department. The one that's been there longer than anyone can remember. Mike Slackernerney. You know, the people in the crowd right now are sinking lower into their chairs. Yeah, you know, the old guy in the lab, the old woman in the lab, whose job it is to educate the new students in the way of grad school. So, exactly, money, a social life, a shave, a PhD student needs not such things. Yeah. So this was actually said to me my first year by this older student called Mike. So I don't make a lot of this stuff up. It's not fiction. And then Mike, who I think maybe like a lot of you here today, you find that you not just have to kind of manage your professor and their expectations of you when you're going to graduate, but you also have to manage your significant others. Your spouse or partner, and when they think you're going to graduate. And so I kept drawing these comics. You know, I drew these comics for the newspaper, and you know, I think people liked them there. I think they connected with them, not just because they could maybe identify with the characters or identify with the situations in the comics. You know, I think people really connected with them because the subtext of the comics, kind of the underlying theme of them, was always about asking the real question about grad school, the big question, which is, why? Why do we put up with all that, right? Because, you know, I'm pretty sure that nobody in this room is really in it for the money. So back when the comics started to get popular, I got very curious, and I looked up what the average stipend was for a grad student, a TA, or an RA over all these disciplines, over all these schools in the US. And what you can do is you can take the average of all these numbers to get an average equal to $14,055 as a kind of, you know, general idea of what grad students make in this country per year. Which, you know, $14,055, it's not bad. You could maybe survive on this if you eat at McDonald's every day. But to put it into perspective, let's compare this figure to what you would be earning, what someone would be earning if they worked at McDonald's. Earning minimum wage in California, how much they make a year, that figure turns out to be Should I stop here now? Should I? All right, thank you very much. It's been a... Now that figure turns out to be... Yes! Whew! That was close. $15 less. Yeah, I am loving it. Then last year I got curious. I was like, oh, I wonder what that figure is these days. And I looked it up, and up until a few years ago, now that figure is more like 18,779, which is, it's better. Until you compare that to what you would be earning, how much the government would be paying you if you were unemployed in this country. For your level of education, the government would be paying you. That's right. Conclusive proof. It pays more to do nothing than it does to come to grad school. Anyways, that didn't make a lot of sense. And so what I did next was, in this story, what I did next was I took my procrastination to the next level. And I put all these comics up in a free web server on campus. And on the ones that came out of the newspaper, I would put the web address in the bottom right corner. And so I think what happened was that, people who read it there would then tell their friends that they knew from undergrad who were going to other universities, and then those people then tell their friends and their coworkers, and then those people then tell other people in other universities. And so slowly over the years, kind of like a virus, these comics, or a Tupperware party, for those of you who understand that reference. These comics really went out into the world, and it's really interesting for me as an artist to find out that these experiences that I was writing about apparently weren't just limited to Stanford University. Yeah. Oh no. Apparently, it's a global misery phenomenon. So that's a list of all the universities, of all the people who subscribed to the website up until a few years ago, just to give you a sense of who's reading these comics. But it was also really interesting, for me to find out that it wasn't just limited to engineering or computer science, which is where I was coming from. There were people from all kinds of disciplines who were reading these comics. So this is a list of all those people's majors, just going from about A to about C. I'm not going to scroll it, because they're kind of interesting to read. People to know that there's people who study art history who are reading these comics, and brain and cognitive scientists, and Buddhist studies. I guess you can get a PhD in BS. Yeah, so that was really interesting. And then even more interesting was that, I started to hear back from all these people across the world and across all these disciplines. And I can roughly categorize the emails I get into these 4 types of emails. Because, it's one of the most important things you learn in grad school is how to categorize things. So anyways, the first kind of email I usually get, I wake up in the morning, I open my email, and there's usually somebody saying something like, "Oh God, I break down and cry each time there's a new comic. I don't know whether to laugh or cry." And so this really makes me feel good. Knowing that I'm making millions of people out there weep. Yeah, you're welcome. But it's not just all grim. People also thank me. They're like, "Hey, Jorge, thank you so much for making the comics. Thank you for helping me slack off. I'm supposed to be working, but instead I just spend days reading your comics." And so this one also makes me feel good. I'm pretty sure somewhere in the world, right, at this point, there was probably a grad student in their lab about to make an incredible discovery for humankind. And, they're probably in the lab about to make this discovery when suddenly their lab mate goes, "Hey, have you checked out this website?" And humankind took a step backwards. Yeah, thanks to me. You're welcome. But then the third type of comment people will write to me, it usually goes something like, "Cecilia, your character is so hot. Can I marry her?" And so this type of comment disturbs me. Right? Because first of all, she's an imaginary cartoon character. And second of all, she's my imaginary girlfriend. Back off. Make up your own imaginary boyfriends or girlfriends. Yeah, or both. We are in the South. I don't really know what that means. But yeah, back off. She's also the mother of my imaginary child. That went too far. I apologize. But yeah, people also write me to say to me, "Hey, Jorge, you make me feel less alone. Your comic is probably responsible for keeping many of us sane." And so when I get this type of comment, I usually go, "Aw, makes me think that maybe, just maybe, all of this is, maybe it's not just a huge waste of time for humankind, Maybe it's just kind of a medium-sized waste of time." Because, I read this survey they did at the University of California at Berkeley, where they sent a questionnaire to all their grad students asking about their mental health. I like how people are laughing already, just because I said grad students and mental health. Anyways, they sent this survey out, they collected, and then what they found something really interesting, which is that 95% of all graduate students, 95% report having felt overwhelmed or overstressed at some point in their graduate career. So that's 95%, right? I know what you're probably thinking. You're probably thinking, who are these other 5%? Why are they lying? Yeah. Although I figured it out, I think they're probably Buddhist studies. That would make sense. But yeah, 95% report being feeling overwhelmed. Even more serious, though, they also found in this survey that 67% of them, 2 out of every 3 graduate students, at some point feels hopeless or depressed about their career, about their lives. And so this one is a little bit more serious. Hopelessness and depression, they're not things that we should take too lightly. Which is why I am here today, you guys, to tell you that there is another way, there is an alternative to hopelessness and depression, and that is the way of procrastination. That's right, procrastination. Now, I know what some of you might be thinking at this point, which is, hey, Jorge, procrastination, that's a bad thing, right? Sex, drugs, procrastination. My mom doesn't know I do any of those things. But I think procrastination just gets a bad rap. It gets a bad reputation. And I think it gets a bad reputation because people very often confuse procrastination with its very close cousin, its very close relative, which is laziness. But I actually argue that procrastination and laziness are not the same thing. They're not the same thing, right? Laziness, that's when you don't want to do anything, right? procrastination, you just don't want to do it now. Let that sink in for a second. Let you think about that. It's not the same thing, procrastination and laziness. And in fact, if you look it up in the dictionary, all it says is that it's to postpone or delay needlessly, which kind of sounds like a negative thing. But I think it actually gives us a loophole. Because if you can find the need for it, maybe it's not so bad. And in fact, I think there are many examples throughout history where procrastination has worked out for the best. So here's a little bit more of my research. Looking at famous procrastinators in history, going all the way back to Isaac Newton. Yes, Newton and the story of how the apple fell on top of him. I think the real question here is, what was he doing under that tree? Right? He certainly wasn't in the lab working, was he? Another story of procrastination is the story of Albert Einstein. I bet Einstein's mother would have loved for him to have worked hard at the patent office, where he had his real job and made his way up to middle management, just like he was supposed to do for his actual career. But instead, he spent a lot of time working on physics equations, kind of on the side, which, kind of worked out for Albert there, relatively speaking. I apologize for that one. I won't do it again. But yeah, another interesting procrastination story is the story of Isaac Asimov. I don't know how many of you know this, but Asimov took 10 years to get his PhD in chemistry from Columbia. Yeah, 10 years. 10 years. Yeah. So that's a picture of Asimov before getting his PhD. Here's a picture of him after the PhD. Before, after. And in fact, later on in his life, Asimov, he wrote in his autobiography, in his memoirs, that when he was in grad school, his professor, his advisor, actually told him to his face that he was a bad writer, that he didn't know how to write well at all. And so despite that, he spent a lot of time working on, what turned out to be some of the most significant science fiction novels of the whole century. Now, a few more modern heroes of procrastination are the Yahoo and the Google guys. Yeah. Is there anyone in the room here today who does not use Yahoo or Google for your research? Yeah, so both companies were actually started by grad students. And legend has it even that Jerry Yang and David Fowler's advisor, their professor, he just happened to go on sabbatical when one of them said to the other, hey, our professor's not here right now. Why don't we try to categorize the entire internet before he comes back? That is some legendary procrastination. There's also, I think, real science behind procrastination. For example, there's the work by the cognitive psychologist Teresa Amabile, who found through experiments with children, but she found through experiments things she calls extrinsic motivators, outside pressures. When somebody's telling you that you have to do something or you should do something because there's a contest or there's going to be a reward at the end, or even if they tell you there's an award at stake, it actually tends to make people feel more controlled and tends to decrease their creativity. More recently, more high-tech, is they looked at people's brain activity while trying to solve problems that require insight. And so the hypothesis here is that, when you're trying to solve problems that require insight or trying to connect things that are new, what you're trying to do in your brain is you're trying to make connections within your brain structure that are not already obviously connected to each other. And so for that, they hypothesize you need this kind of low-grade, almost subconscious brain activity so that if you think about it too much or if you actually try to focus on it too hard, you can actually suppress some of this important connection making. Yeah, that's right. I have references with like et al. And everything. Right? There's all this science and all this history behind procrastination. Still, it has kind of a negative stigma about it, right? In society and in academia. And so I asked myself the question then, why is that, What's really the problem with procrastination? And so I thought about this question for a long time. Perhaps too long. But I thought about this question for a long time, and it occurred to me that maybe the answer here has something to do with this very typical conversation, this very, very common conversation that I always find myself having with graduate students, no matter where I go, anywhere in the world. It usually goes something like this. You go up to a grad student, or a group of grad students, and you say to them, hey, how's it going? And they usually respond with the same enthusiasm you guys responded with. Something along the lines of, oh God, I'm so stressed, I'm trying to graduate, I have all these things I have to do, I've only been sleeping 3 hours a night. And so you go, whoa, that's crazy, right? That's insane, you're only sleeping 3 hours a night? That's crazy, right? Because, that must mean that you're working, you're actually doing research 21 hours a day? And they usually respond, no. No, I went out, I watched TV, I goofed around. I'm organizing this event for the campus Pick Your Favorite Obscure Hobby Here club because, hey, I am the club president. And so you go, oh? And then they go, but I should be doing research. I'm supposed to be working right now. And so I thought, the real problem here is not that there aren't enough hours in the week, to do all your work and pursue all your hobbies and your interests. The real problem here seems to be all about guilt. I always get a nice, uncomfortable silence here. Everyone's going, Guilt, right? Because the thing about grad school and academia in general, right, is that it sort of never ends, right? There's always something else at any given time of day, at any given moment. There's always something else that you should be doing, that you're supposed to be doing, that you could be doing. There's always more papers you could be reading or writing, more references you could be looking up, more funding you could be applying for, more experiments you could be running, more data analysis you could be doing, more talks you could be giving, more equipment you could be putting together. Whereas, I think people with regular jobs, 9-to-5 jobs, I think it's a little bit easier for them to just leave everything at the office at the end of the day and then just go home and relax. In grad school, right, in academia, it's sort of there's this constant anxiety of always feeling like there's something else that you could be doing, that you should be doing, you're supposed to be doing. And yet you find yourself a lot of the time, basically, not doing them. And so I think it's this constant struggle that, maybe contributes to a lot of people kind of burning out a little bit early in their academic careers. So then I asked myself the question, why is that? If you feel like you have all these things that you're supposed to be doing, that you should be doing, that you could be doing, why can't we just do them? Why can't we just do the things we're supposed to do instead of doing other things, and then you feel guilty and depressed about them to the point where you don't even enjoy those things you used to enjoy before? Well, thought about this question also for a long time. And I think that maybe the answer in this case, bear with me, I think maybe the answer has something to do with the fact that we just don't want to do them. You see, this is all related to my grand theory of procrastination, or as I like to call it, my unified theory of procrastination in academia. Which must be correct, right? Because it has such an awesome acronym. But this theory of mine, it kind of goes back to what I called in early comics the Newton's laws of graduation. So if you're familiar with these from the comics or from the books, bear with me for a second. But the first law of graduation says that the first law says that the grad student in procrastination they tend to stay in procrastination unless an external force is applied to them. This is formalized more in the second law, which says that the HA of a doctoral or master's thesis process is directly proportional to the flexibility F given by the advisor and inversely proportional to the student's motivation M, which we can write as an equation as the H of the thesis equals the amount of flexibility divided by the amount of motivation, which we can abbreviate as A equals F over M. Which we can rewrite as F equals MA. And everybody knows you can't argue with F equals MA. Unless, of course, you're moving at close to the speed of light, right? But let's face it, that never happens in grad school. And I just want to take a moment here to thank you guys for laughing at this joke. One time I gave this presentation to a group of arts and social science students. It's dead silent. So yeah, flexibility divided by motivation. So let's explore this equation in more detail now. Let's start with the bottom term down here, motivation. Because I think we all come to graduate school. Well, I mean, let's face it, we all come here because it seems better than getting a real job. But still, you get very excited about it, right? You come with high expectations. You come here eager to learn, eager to make a difference. You're ready to take that next step in your life and, turn that corner and face the challenges of graduate school. And it turns out actually grad school is more like more like that. Or if if you were to plot it as plot this phenomenon in the motivator meter, you usually see motivation start really high, but then quickly that first year, it all comes crashing down. And I think it all comes crashing down for a couple of reasons. First of all, you have to get used to being average. Maybe in your undergrad or high school, you were one of the top students. You were, one of the top in your class. Maybe even the valedictorian. But then you find out in grad school, everybody was a valedictorian. Not much room there. You also find out that apparently grad school makes you dumber, contrary to what was advertised. Right? I think what happens is before grad school, you're fresh out of college, you feel pretty good about yourself. Because, the ratio, the difference between what you think you know and what you think you don't know, pretty high. So you feel good. But then you get to grad school, and you already forgot most of what you learned. But you also learn how much you don't know, right? Because suddenly you're surrounded by all these experts in your field and all these really, really brilliant people. And so then what happens to a lot of people is you kind of start to compare yourself. Yeah, you know who I'm talking about here. That person in your lab or your group that just seems to work all the time, just seems to crank out all those papers. Makes you want to. But don't do it. Trust me. Yeah, you end up comparing yourself to your advisor, to your professor. It's actually a well-known phenomenon, well-known documented thing in academia. It's called imposter syndrome. Many of you may have heard of this already, but it's called imposter syndrome. It's kind of like when you think that, maybe the only reason they let you into the program was a clerical mistake. Sometimes you feel you're not as smart as everybody else, that you're somehow fooling people, that you just don't belong. Still, you hang in there, right? Maybe you get excited about the research project that you picked for your thesis, or more likely, the project that was picked for you. But you get excited about it, right? It's pretty cool. It's a cool project. It's very interesting. Yeah. And then you find out it's also impossible. And somebody already did it. Maybe you get motivated about your qualifying exams or your finals, but then you actually pass, and you can't even get out of bed anymore. Still, you hang in there. And maybe you slowly claw your way up the motivation chart, little by little. Little by little. Up the motivation chart, day by day, it gets better. But then, that one day, you get that phone call. That phone call from your friend. You know which friend I'm talking about, right? The one that didn't go to grad school. And you're talking to them on the phone, and they're like, oh, yeah, we have this great life now. We have this beautiful family. We just had a baby. A real baby. All the baby pictures are on Facebook, right? In fact, their profile picture is a baby. Which is kind of weird, right? But yeah, they're like, oh yeah, we have these great jobs, we make all this money, we just bought a house. And you're like, what? You can buy houses? You drive a nice car, right? Meanwhile, you're on the other line, all by yourself, alone at night, still in the lab, eating ramen noodles. And before you know it, you've been in grad school longer than you thought you'd ever be. And so that's kind of when things start to look scary for a lot of people, because that's kind of when fear sets in. Fear, I think, of a couple of things for a lot of people. First of all, fear of failure. I think a lot of us who do make it this far do tend to be the kind of overachieving type A personalities. And so I think we have a hard time admitting to ourselves, when we haven't succeeded or we have a lot invested in our achievements and our successes. And so we have a hard time admitting to ourselves when it's maybe better to keep moving on. Of course, the problem is you also get fear of moving on. Right? Because, grad school can be kind of comfortable sometimes, right? It's a pretty easy life. You can walk into your office at like 10 a.m. or 11 a.m., noon. All right, let's see if this works. How many people here today came to this lecture straight from their apartments? Nice. Starting your workday. Yeah, a lot of people, I think, they actually get very comfortable, and so they're actually afraid of what will happen to them if they graduated, right? Because if you graduate, then you have to decide what you want to be when you grow up. You get sort of afraid of rejoining the real world out there. beyond the walls, right? It's kind of like what happens to people in prison. Yeah. So a lot of people kind of freak out. They're like, oh my God, what's going to happen if I graduate? And so they end up finding other things to do, and they end up procrastinating a lot. Like that person right there. They end up procrastinating a lot. And so my message to you guys here today is that if you find yourself panicking and you find yourself procrastinating a lot, that procrastination, it's okay. It's okay because, a very important, significant point for me in my graduate career was to take a class from this professor called Bernie Roth. And Bernie Roth is a professor there at Stanford who's this world-famous, world-renowned expert and researcher and authority in the field of kinematics and robotics. Perhaps you've never heard of him. But Bernie Roth is also kind of a groovy 70s kind of dude, and so he would always ask us in class, he would always challenge us, just like I'm going to challenge you guys here right now, to tell me what are some of the things in life that you have to do. Let's start with that. What are some of the things in life that you have to do? You have to pay taxes? Sure. You have to pay taxes. Somebody else said, you have to buy a car in North Carolina. You have to get out of bed, you have to graduate, you have to eat, you have to sleep, you have to get a job, you have to publish. That's usually what people say at this point. But Bernie's point was that, in life, there's really nothing that you have to do, right? Basically, nobody's making you do any of these things. Not even to eat, not even to sleep, not even to pay your taxes. Basically, everything you do, he would say, everything you do it because you want to do it. And so I thought, hey, if that's true, then I say that procrastination is what you do when you're doing what you want to be doing. Right? If everything you do it because you want to do it, then even procrastination has that kind of equal value, and so it's a good thing, right? You just have to nod here and smile. Ignore the logical fallacies. Basically, the main message here is just to maybe relax a little bit, enjoy it, and listen to your inner procrastinator. Now, I know what some of you might be thinking right now, which is, hey, Jorge, all that procrastination stuff, that's great. But what if I never graduate? How does that help me get out of Raleigh, North Carolina? How does that help me graduate? Well, fortunately for all of us, for everybody, there are other terms in the equation. So as small as this bottom term here may get for you, inevitably the upper term up here will get even smaller. And so here I would try to make a joke about L'Hopital's rule. Maybe 10 of you would get that one. But basically what happens is that, inevitably, the final decision to graduate, the final impetus to finish is essentially made for you. Inevitably what happens is, because, I've talked to a lot of people with PhDs and who have finished, and, I bet if you ask anyone, what I found out is if you ask anyone with a PhD, even your professors, even the postdocs in your group, even your advisor, if they were 100% happy with the final product that they turned in at the end, most likely, I would bet they'll tell you, not 100%, right? Most likely they'll tell you they ran out of time, they ran out of money, they were expecting a baby, they had to take a job somewhere, or they found a job that they really, really wanted, and so they just grabbed everything they had done up to that point, anything they could, slapped it together into this one document, checked that all the margins were the right. Very important. Margins were the right size, and then just shoved it out the door. Because the other thing I noticed in talking with people with PhDs is that, if you look at the work they're actually famous for, most likely, I bet, they're not famous for the work they did as grad students, right? If you look at all the famous people in your field, if you look at the work they're actually famous for, it's more likely for the work they did as professors, right? Which is kind of scary. But that makes sense, right? It's when they were professors, right? Because then they had grad students do the work for them. So at some point you realize all these things and you're like, oh my God, I can do it. And you ramp up the motivation chart and maybe you get up to the point where you defend your thesis or at least write the outline for your thesis. But then it gets a little bit bumpy, which I don't really have time for you to cover that here today. I'll leave that for my future work. Future work. Nowhere else except academia would that make anyone laugh. Future work. But yeah, future work. At some point you realize that. And then the other thing I would say to you guys if you're stuck in grad school is that, I find that a lot of grad students really get stressed out because they form this image in their heads of their professors as these omnipotent beings, right? Looking down upon them and judging your every move and your every word. And so I always like to tell people, you can relax a little bit, right? Your professor, well, probably. Your professor probably doesn't think you're an idiot. You can relax a little bit because the fact is that he or she really really doesn't think about you that much. And so just to wrap up here, just to finish up here, I feel like it's also very important for me to put up this slide at the end too, because people see these comics that I draw and they see these watch these presentations, and they think that I have a very cynical view of grad school, and they ask me if I wish that I had never gone to grad school, or they wish if I had quit grad school earlier. But I always like to tell people that no, I'm really glad that I went to grad school. I'm really glad that I was able to stick with it and finish the degree. Because, I think you do learn a lot of very important skills in graduate school that are going to help you no matter what you do end up doing in life, whether you stay in academia or you pursue an alternate career. You get a lot of very important transferable skills. Starting with, most important, first of all, you get pretty good at using PowerPoint. Second most important skill I learned in grad school was how to write bullet points. But the most important skill I learned in graduate school was how to give a 1-hour presentation on any topic. Even procrastination. Now, I joke around with this, but I'm actually serious about this. By this, I mean you learn in grad school the ability to teach yourself anything technical that you need to learn, to become a self-learner, an independent learner. You learn the ability to think analytically and be able to break things down into its components. And you also kind of learn the ability, to kind of keep in mind the big picture of things, right? And then be able to communicate that to other people. Yes. Everyone's really angry now because he snuck in a good moral to the story. So I'll leave you guys with the words of Mike Slackernerney, who said, grad school is a state of mind. And which state would that be? Preferably sleeping. Which you're interrupting, now go away. So thank you. Sure. Yeah. Okay. Awesome. Do you guys have any questions? I'm contractually obligated to answer them. Since I've left grad school, where do I get my material? That's the question. Like, where do I draw my inspiration? Like, how deep are the scars? They're deep, they're deep. You know, I tell people that it's been a while, but I tell people I draw a comic for every day that I was in grad school. I'm only like halfway through. Yeah. But no, what happens a lot is, you know, one thing I realized a long time ago is that these comics, they're not really kind of about me anymore. They're not really like about my personal things. They're really just kind of about everybody, about you guys. And so what happens is people send me their ideas a lot, and or at events like these, they come up afterwards, and then they share their stories of pain and humiliation. And so I make jokes about that. Yeah.
Are you going to follow it up with one on postdocs?
Am I going to now do a comic strip about postdocs? Yeah. An even smaller demographic. That would be a great commercial move, right? All right. Any other questions? Yep. I think the question was, do I ever find myself on the other side of the phone? Is that what you mean? And like, do I feel bad about making other people feel bad? What's that? The answer is no, no. Not really, no. Yeah. Why there's so many scientists who have turned into cartooning? There's more than one. I guess 2 is a trend. 2, you can draw a trend, right? Yeah, I don't know. Maybe it's this issue of the scars, I think. Yep. Is there going to be another movie? Yeah, how many people have seen the first movie? How many of you? Oh, awesome. 5 of you, good. Should we make a sequel? The PhD movie 2, still in grad school. No, yeah, we were thinking about it. It was a really traumatic experience, to be honest. Like, I'm really proud. If you haven't seen the movie, just Google it. It's called the PhD movie. I'm sure you can find it pirated somewhere. Or you can pay $5 to see it on our website. But yeah, it was a great movie. I don't know how many of you know this, but we filmed it at Caltech, and we used like real grad students and real professors and real everything on location and stuff like that. So check it out if you can, and maybe if enough of you watch it, we'll make a sequel. Yeah.
What were your best and worst moments of grad school?
What were my best and worst moments in grad school? Well, the best one is pretty easy. It was leaving grad school. The worst moment for me was probably, we actually put it in the movie, like there's a dramatization of this event. But yeah, it was like 3 a.m. I was working in a borrowed space in the next door professor's lab, and I was mixing all these chemicals that are supposed to give you cancer, and I was like, all suited up and stuff, and I'm like pouring one thing into it, and then suddenly the whole thing just like out into the floor, into everything. And you know how they say you sometimes see your life flash before your eyes? I didn't think that was true. It is true. I saw like my whole life flash before my eyes. That was probably the worst moment. Yeah. Yeah.
Can we expect another comic strip about NC State?
About what?
Can we expect another comic strip about NC State? The last one was in 2005.
Oh, can you expect another comic about NC State? Sometimes I draw comics about the visits that the places I visit, and then it got a little bit unsustainable because I was going to like 50 schools a year, and I just can't draw that much. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's still early. Maybe something interesting will happen. Yeah.
Are there other people that are lampooning academia that you look up to or enjoy?
Are there other people who write about academia that I enjoy reading? Not really. I don't really read that much. Other things. Yeah, I guess I don't know of that many other people. Yeah.
So the comic started as procrastinating what you should be doing. How the comic is what you should be doing. Part of the work of the comic, you find yourself procrastinating.
Yeah, well, kind of the secret I found during grad school is that I would procrastinate doing research by doing the comics, and I would procrastinate doing comics by working on research. So that kind of worked out. So nowadays, I just add a lot of side projects, and it all kind of works out there in the end. Yeah. I don't know if I mentioned, but we made a movie about. Yeah.
Were there storylines that you were doing while you were in grad school after your risk of offending?
At every of these events, I always get asked two questions. The first one is like, how do I still get ideas? Like, how deep are the scars? The second one is always like, what did your professor think about your comics? Which I think says more about the people asking the question than any situation here. But yeah, everyone's like, oh my God, what did your professor think? Or if they're, never mind. But yeah, no, but my professor was he was pretty cool about it. Like, he was actually kind of a fan of the comics. Like, the first day they came out, in the newspaper, he came up to me and said, Jorge, I saw your comic in the newspaper. Piled higher and deeper. That's a very accurate description of what your next 5 years are going to look like. So I thought, that's not good. That's not good. All right, so there's a reception and a book signing and stuff. Yeah.
Yes. Thank you.